I could have called this I'm switching from Canon to Sony, so I don't want to hear any complaints about clickbait. This is the Sony a7S Mark III, and it's the greatest video camera I've ever used. Now that I have my hands on an actual production copy, the autofocus is like clairvoyant. It just snaps into focus on the right subject every time and keeps it in focus no matter where it moves. It does 4K 30, 60, 120, 24, of course. It's got a flip forward screen, which I actually really need, and a ton of lenses and sensor stabilization, and look, no cables on the microphone, but it's still got a real host of problems. Like, first of all, let's look at the top of it here. Whereas the R5 has a nice display right here that allows you to get all of your settings ready before you start recording, this has no display. In fact, if the camera's on a tripod and you want to see your settings, you have to flip the screen out to the side and then tilt it like that so you can actually see what's going on. Not a deal breaker, but it's a $3,500 camera and you couldn't give me a little top display? Another thing, look at the mode dial here. Keep in mind, this is a 12 megapixel camera. It's not really a hybrid camera. It's a video only camera. So they give you the usual PASM camera modes, but those are all for stills. It has this big dial and only the one video setting is actually for video. If you're in stills and you switch from aperture to manual mode, you can do it with the dial. But if you're in video, you have to go in and use the function menu. Another thing, they gave me a flip screen and they gave me a touch menu, but no, you can't change the settings with touch. You have to use the dials on the back of the camera here, which, like, that's okay, except it kind of shakes the camera when you're making the changes. And if you're working in front of the camera, it completely changes all the controls. I'm filming on a Canon R6 right now, and I've already changed the settings multiple times while recording the video so I can adjust the amount of depth of field that I have. Speaking of, I want more background blur, I'm just gonna get it. Touch, so nice. What else? How about the menus? Yes, Sony finally gave us a new menu system after years of complaining about awful usability problems on the old menu system. And yes, it's way better. Okay, thank you, Sony. But you still kind of missed the mark in a big way. First of all, what we wanted was like a proper Android-based interface, which would have been super easy to program, except would have required you to put Android on there, and you didn't. You still have this weird homegrown clunky thing that's kind of meant to mimic some smartphone interfaces. Like, you can swipe vertically through the menus, but it takes you one page at a time instead of smoothly scrolling. If you kind of let go halfway through, it just kind of jumps to the next page. It feels really weird. And if you go right and nest into those menus, you can't then swipe left to get back. There's no swiping left or right, just up or down. Sony menu items are incredibly confusingly named. Sometimes you can't tell what a function does by its name. But Sony has little help information that you can access by pressing the trash can button, like the steady shot option. Let's say you're picking this camera up and you're wondering, what does steady shot do? Oh, I see a question mark. I'll press that. Here's the description. Steady shot. Sets steady shot for shooting movies. Definitions aren't supposed to include the word they're defining. But maybe it gets better than that. Let's look at the help information for steady shot adjust. I actually don't know what that means. Sets whether or not to automatically adjust necessary information to steady shot. That's defining steady shot adjust. Thanks. Here's a good one right on the first page. S and Q settings. What does S and Q mean? No normal human knows what S and Q means, so let's hit the help button and see how helpful that is. Sets S and Q motion settings. Really, that's what S and Q settings does? I'll tell you. S and Q means slow motion, quick motion, which humans call slow motion, and time lapses. That's what everybody knows it. Literally nobody on the planet who's not a Sony engineer knows what S and Q would mean. Why would they go through the trouble of revamping the menu system and still leave in bizarre, terrible help files like that? Sony, I have been a technical writer for many years. I also know how to teach photography and how your cameras work, so I will happily rewrite all those help files. Send me the dictionary file that has them. I'll rewrite them in human English, and send it back to you, and you can use it free, no charge. You might also think the help menus would be a great place to have illustrations for things like what zebras mean. It is a camera after all. The people using it might be visual learners, but no, everything's just simple text. After I film something, I need to scrub through and make sure that it actually recorded. On a Canon, this is brilliant. It works well, it just works the way you'd expect it to. You hit playback and then you scrub through with your finger, and you know if it's sharp, if you have sound. But it doesn't work like that with the Sony. You get some like 1980s VCR controls that you have to pull down, and then you fast forward or push the rewind button to go forward or backwards, and it means the whole process takes much longer. It means it kind of sucks, and you know what it really means? It means that when I film with it, I don't double check my footage because it's such a pain. Another complaint that I have is that, well, it's $3,500, and I'm willing to pay for that because I have a pretty big YouTube channel and it costs us a lot if like a memory card fails, and it's got dual memory cards and records to both. That's great, but this is in many ways more camera than I need. Like, I wanted 4K 60. That lets me go 50% for some slow motion effects. That's great. But I don't really need 4K 120, but Sony doesn't make a 4K 60 camera, and it has this beautiful EVF that I've literally never used while recording video because it's an EVF for a stills camera. Like, electronic viewfinders for video cameras, they tilt because video cameras are often on a tripod or you're shooting low. You almost never just hold them up to your eye like this and shoot video. And it's gorgeous when I have tested it. Like, it's got like 9 million pixels. It's like better than real life. It's super huge. But I've never used it in the real world, and instead I just end up using this rear screen 100% of the time. If you're a Canon RF shooter, this is going to blow your mind. Look at this. This is the naked exposed sensor of the a7S, just there to collect dust every time you happen to be changing lenses in the field. Why? When you turn off a Canon R, R5, RP, R6, they close the shutter over the delicate sensor, and that helps to keep dust out. Real world, we've been shooting with the Canon EOS R since like 2018. Not a single speck of dust on it. I have never cleaned the sensor. With my Sony cameras that don't cover the sensor, they collect dust and I have to clean them before every single shoot. The bizarre thing is Sony made this an option on the A9 to automatically cover the sensor, but then they took it away for the Sony a7S. And I don't actually need it that much for stills, because with stills I could go into Lightroom and clone it out every time, but for video, cloning out a spot of dust is much harder. Sony, cover the sensor. If you're under the age of 30, this next one's gonna blow your mind. The first thing this camera does when you turn it on is ask you to set the time and date. Now, every other device in the world asks you to connect to the internet, so it can set the time and date. But this thing has basically no internet connectivity at all because it's written on some really outdated operating system, so it can't do basic things like send your files over to Google Drive or upload stuff to Instagram. All it can do is spit out these tiny floppy drives so that you can stick them into a computer or memory card reader. It can connect to a smartphone app, which is a miserable, awful experience. Or this one, it kind of addresses the problem. It has FTP, file transfer protocol, that will send files to a specially set up FTP server on your private network, basically. And when that works, it works. But I was in IT like forever. And I managed to get it set up because I have a special NAS and I know how to set up an FTP server. But it doesn't provide like basic capabilities. Like, you can't browse for folders. Literally, you can't browse. You have to type the path name out on this tiny, awful little keyboard. And if you don't capitalize something right, guess what? You get just a general error message, and then you get to start the whole FTP setup process all over. If you need to like punch through a VPN to get through your router to get to your private FTP server, no, there's no VPN capabilities. Give me a break. Like, what is happening? Why can't I still transfer my stuff to Google Drive? Okay, honestly, this is a really good camera. It's the best camera, and I am switching over to it. I bought new lenses specifically for this. The whole thing without the cables and with just the absolutely gorgeous video and the amazing focusing, nothing else works nearly as well. but it's definitely not a flawless camera. Oh, and Chelsea made this hat for me and for you, I guess, so if you want to buy them, you can use the link here. Let me know your thoughts below, like, is it worth it? Where did Sony screw up, and why do they keep getting these things wrong? Be sure to subscribe because I'm going to have a proper tutorial out for people who did buy this, as well as a more detailed review. Thanks a lot. Bye.